Hey, good morning. Today is Monday, March the 25th, 2024. The time now is 7:45 a.m. I want to talk briefly about the situation in Moscow, Russia. So last week, at the end of last week, there was a bombing in Russia, okay, which is said to have killed about 130 people. So the bombing took place at a concert hall, and once again, it's said to have led to about 130 people dead and about 60 people wounded. Now, I have been getting snippet of information from the media sites here in the West, and it has been alleged that the United States had given the Russian government an intelligence on the 7th of March or so about the possibility of an attack, and that Vladimir Putin basically dismissed the whole intelligence matter. Now, from the Russian point of view, it is being said that the bombers were actually making their way towards Ukraine. The Ukrainian government is saying that they have nothing to do with this bombing and so on. But the Russians are alleging that the bombers had, or the bombers have relations with the Ukrainian system. Now, I don't know where this is coming from, but where this is going is concerning. As much as the West can say that they basically attempted to give the Russian government an intelligence and that the Russian government faltered. It is also interesting, but I would not blame the Russian government in this case because for the past few years, okay, and let's say for the past 2 years actually, since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the information, a misinformation campaign between the West and Russia is so much uh, is so much dangerous and comedic, but it's so painful that I do believe both sides do not trust each other. But also, it is painful that many of us around the world who have nothing to do with this situation that is going on between Russia and the West, it is painful because we are kept out of a situation which is spiraling out of control, which eventually would include all of us. We all going to get pulled into this situation, but we are limited in terms of our ability to speak out, to speak up, or to work towards alleviating the situation between Russia and the West. Now, this bombing, as much as they are saying that, at least in the West, they are saying that ISIS, the Islamic State, is responsible for this bombing. Like, I kind of ask myself, what is the relationship between ISIS and Russia? What has Russia done to ISIS that ISIS would go into Moscow and attack a concert hall, killing 130 people? Because I don't know, man. I think to me, it seems more like a deflection. It seems more like a deflection because the Russians are saying one thing, and then in the West, they are saying another thing. And I find it offensive in that the fact that the West is immediately getting on the offensive and stressing that the bombing is the responsibility of ISIS or the Islamic State, if you will, while the Russian state is saying something else. So another question I would want to ask is, what does the West know about this? Because the West seems to know more about the Russian state. The fact that something happened in my house and you are telling me who is responsible for it. As much as I am saying somebody else is responsible for it, you are saying, no, somebody is responsible for it. So what the heck do you know? In this case, it can be dangerous in a way that the West is actually putting itself in a position where it could be accused of not knowing the whole thing, but being responsible, promoting the bombing in Russia. Vladimir Putin won the election, his fifth term. So he won, the last time I checked, he won about 87% of the vote. And I do believe this bombing was like a welcome. Yeah, welcome, let's continue to fight. Now, the Russians are saying that the Ukrainians are responsible for this. The Ukrainians are saying we don't want, and we don't have nothing to do with this. The West is saying ISIS or the Islamic State is responsible for this. Now, I don't know if Ukraine is responsible for this. I don't know if the West is responsible for this. But if you are a Russian, okay, especially a Russian in the Russian government, given all the halahala that has been going on since the invasion of Ukraine, given all the misinformation, given all the things that are happening, whether or that have happened, that had happened, whether we are talking about the bombing of the Nord Stream pipeline, whether we are talking about the bombing of Crimea or the bridge connecting Crimea between Russia and Ukraine. If you are a Russian in the Russian government, it is very easy for you to begin to say the West is responsible for this, or this is another, PSYOP activity by the West. But now, the Russians are saying the Ukrainians are responsible. If the Ukrainians are really responsible for this, then this is a welcome call. Okay, Putin, you've won the election. Let's do this. It could be another activity or another action by the Ukrainian government, if they are responsible, to basically throw a punch, basically make a pinch on the Russians, agitate them so they can react more and get this war continue. But if Ukraine is very much really responsible for this bombing, if they know the people who did it and they did not stop it, in the long term, this is not going to work for the Ukrainian. It's not going to be positive for the Ukrainians in the long term. Because as much as Putin has won the election, and this bombing is a humiliation, because it is a humiliation. Yes, you won the election, okay, but what was you doing when terrorists or whoever they were plotting to kill innocent Russians? Okay, so this is basically a humiliation. That is, if the Ukrainians did it, if the West are responsible, or if the West know who did it. However, I think in the long term, it is also going to inflame the radical elements in Russia, the hawks in Russia, to go harder. Because I do believe the hawks in Russia, the radical elements in Russia, when the bombing took place, they immediately began to eye Ukraine and begin to eye the West. When you add the fact that in the past few days, the Western government, they've been making threats. You have Macron even been saying, talking about the possibility that France or NATO would get involved directly into Ukraine. The bombing in Moscow, which have killed about 130 people, it is going to radicalize the hawks in Russia to go harder against Ukraine. If Ukraine actually did it, if they can prove that Ukraine is responsible. But if they can prove that the West knows something, they knew something about this bombing, they are responsible for it, I think it is going to basically break apart, okay, to a dangerous proportion, the relationship between the West and Russia, which is already at an all-time low. And this is not going to be good for humanity. Now, this thing needs to be put to an end. It needs to be brought to an end as soon as possible, because it is not going to be beneficial or positive for humanity. And I don't know what the West is, what they are thinking, whether they still want to destroy Russia at all cost. I don't know how much Russians are planning to go with this war. I don't know what the Ukrainians are planning, whether they want the war to continue and whether they want the war to end. And if Ukrainians want the war to continue, I wouldn't blame them, because what we are seeing is also an ego issue. The Ukrainians have invested a lot in this war, okay? Whether they are right or whether they are wrong. When we are looking at in international relations, no country, no government, no leader want to be the government or the leader that was in power when the country disintegrated, when the country is beaten at a war, where the country is attacked or is destroyed. No country wants to be destroyed. No country wants to be attacked and not do anything about it. So it makes sense on the Ukrainian part. Now, when we look at the Russian side, in terms of big power politics, no country that considers itself a power, okay, a superpower, wants to be humiliated. No country that considers itself a power or a superpower wants to be defeated by another country that, quote unquote, is not a superpower. No country that considers itself a superpower wants to be defeated, whether we are talking about in a Cold War or in a hot war, by another superpower or by another power. No country that considers itself a superpower, as the United States is, wants to be defeated in, whether we are talking about a Cold War or in hot war, by a country that is not a superpower. As much as we can consider Russia a power, many in the world, academics or not, do not consider Russia a superpower. And if you look at it from the position of NATO and the United States, Russia is not a superpower. And Russia winning in Ukraine will be a devastating blow, a humiliation for the West. So we should consider the fact that the West is going to go hard on Russia. The West is going to continue to go hard on Russia. And Western leaders continue to speak on their willingness to defeat Russia at all cost. Now, in terms of the bombing in Russia, yes, I do believe whoever did it was attempting to humiliate Vladimir Putin. He had just won re-election in the Russian election, okay, the Russian presidential election. He had just gotten elected. So by carrying out an attack in Moscow, where you kill innocent people who are basically at a concert, okay, in a concert hall, it serves as a humiliation for the Russian government. Whether Putin dropped the ball, whether the Russian security system, the security apparatus, whether they dropped the ball or not, this is a humiliation for them. But also, I do believe somebody in Russia, in the Russian security system, will be forced to answer question to Putin. Because if you are the security, what was you doing? Okay? What was you doing in terms of checking people to make sure nobody is trying to harm innocent civilian? But also, in terms of the humiliation, this attack in Moscow also spread sentiment that the Russian security system is not as strong or as sophisticated as the rest of the world thinks. And this, since Russia attacked, invaded Ukraine, has been the narrative that has been spread since the invasion of Ukraine, that the Russians are not as strong, they are not as powerful or as professional as they present themselves to be, or as the rest of the world have thought of them for so long. But once again, in the long run, I think this is going to harden the Russian people. It is going to harden the Russian resolve and basically force them, okay, to go hard in this war against Ukraine. And if they do, I do not see the West getting involved in Ukraine. I do not see the West getting involved in Ukraine. And this is because this is a war in which Russia has not attacked the West. So if NATO get involved in Ukraine, it means that they are going to be getting involved in a war where their enemy, Russia, has not attacked them. And to be honest, people will go crazy when they begin to see their children, their sons, their husbands, their uncles, their fathers begin to return home in body bags. People will go crazy. I remember when the war started, there were a lot of people from around the world and from the West, most especially, that basically flocked to Ukraine to fight the Russians. And I do believe many who did so not only because they wanted to defend Ukrainian, they want to defend innocent people. They did so because of testosterone and because of all the things that we've been taught about the Russians. We've watched so many movies in which the Russians are the wicked people, the bad people. And with these movies also stressing to us that the good people are the West, most especially the United States. We've watched movies in which the U.S. is sending big ships and crazy looking planes that are just dangerous to somebody else's country or region and bombing the heck out of them. So with this, we have this belief that the West, NATO, Europe, and most especially the United States is sophisticated enough to defeat Russia in a war. That could be the case. That could not be the case. However, I do believe that was the reason why many people went to Russia. They very much think they were going to be able to defeat a weak, once again, country, a gas station that masqueraded itself as a country. They basically was acting upon the notion that the Russian government or the Russian military is not as strong. It's weak, incompetent, unprofessional. And they flocked to Ukraine. However, many begin to realize that they were fighting an enemy that is very much a formidable enemy. They were fighting an enemy that even if this enemy lose in the war, the possibility of them dying in the war against the Russian is much larger. That is because whatever people may say about the Russians are not Afghanistan, the Russians are not Iraq, the Russians are not Somalia, the Russians are not Niger, the Russians are not countries around the world that cannot defend themselves. So people who flock to Russians immediately begin to realize that they were fighting an enemy that was not going to was not going to back off. They were fighting an enemy that possessed a firepower that is far greater than them, especially dealing with the fact that the most powerful countries in the world, the United States and NATO, or NATO countries, were not willing to get involved in the war. It became a reality, and many. I remember that is a Canadian by the name of Wally, who is a sniper, is known to be one of the most advanced snipers in the world, and went to Ukraine. And immediately he left because there were instances where he nearly got killed. And he himself admits that the Russians are not as others had thought of them to be. Look, I do believe NATO is not going to get involved in the war in Ukraine. But I also believe, just like Western leaders have been saying since the war started, that they are going to defeat Russia at all costs using Ukrainian body. I think that's what's going to continue, which in this case is not going to be good for the Ukrainian people. And my heart is to the Ukrainian people. My heart is also to the Ukrainian government that is basically caught in is caught in between two powerful entities fighting. In Africa, we say when two elephants fight, the grass suffer. And that's what's happening in Ukraine. But once again, the United States and the West are not going to be involved in Ukraine directly. However, we in the global South, and I'm talking about the various countries in the global South, need to make sure that they are not involved in what's happening in Ukraine. They should not get themselves involved in Ukraine. However, the global South must strive to manage the situation in Ukraine so that it doesn't become an all-out war between NATO and Russia, and also so that it doesn't result in a nuclear war. It does not result into a nuclear war between NATO and Russia. Because if that is the case, then we are all in big trouble. But I'm going to end by reflecting on where I started. With the situation in Moscow, the bombing in Moscow, whoever did it, I do believe, did it to humiliate Vladimir Putin and to basically take away his election victory, the narrative surrounding his election victory, and to make the whole idea of his incompetency being the talk of the day. But if the Ukrainian did this, as the Russians are alleging, once again, it is a blow against Vladimir Putin. But in the long run, if the Ukrainian did this and it is proven, it is going to be a big problem for the Ukrainian because this is going to harden the Russians to go harder. In this case, innocent people would have been killed at a concert. So this is not going to work well for the Ukrainians. If the West did it, it is going to inflame the situation between Russia and the West. Thank you very much for watching once again. Peace.